There were more secrets than truths in this case. A young student found dead on the railroad tracks had fallen in love with the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. My name is James Jones. I am 38 years old, and I am a detective with the Billings Police Department in Montana, where I have been working for 15 years. The call came in at 5 a.m. on October 27th. I woke up to the sharp ring of the phone and, glancing at the clock, knew that nothing good was in store for me. Over the years on the force, I had learned to distinguish between these calls. Some heralded the usual routine, others promised long, sleepless nights. This one clearly belonged to the latter category. Sergeant Miller, who was on duty, reported briefly. The body of a young woman had been found on the railroad tracks 3 miles south of the city. The freight train engineer had discovered her around 4 in the morning. The train was coming from Miles City and managed to brake without hitting the body. The engineer, 50-year-old Tommy Wilson, was so shaken by what he saw that he had to be hospitalized with a heart attack. I got dressed, drank some strong coffee, and drove to the scene. Patrol cars had already cordoned off the area with yellow tape for 100 yards. Officer Ray Cooper, an elderly police officer who had been on the beat for over 20 years, nodded to me when he saw me. "Detective Jones, the body is there, between the rails. I told everyone to stay away until you arrived. The medical examiner's people are waiting too." The body lay between the rails, about 50 yards from the old crossing. A young black woman, about 20 to 22 years old, was wearing worn jeans and a red sweater. Her hair was disheveled, and she was wearing white sneakers, one of which had come off and was lying nearby, almost at the edge of the road. At first glance, it looked like suicide or an accident, but my experience told me that it wasn't that simple. The clothes were stained not only with blood, but also with a reddish dirt characteristic of the soil in this part of the state. What was particularly interesting was that this dirt was only on the back and rear of the jeans, indicating that the body had been dragged along the ground. In addition, there were marks on the jacket as if it had been grabbed and pulled. "What do you think, Detective?" asked Robert Clark, the medical examiner who had arrived with me, a man in his 60s with a gray beard whom I had known for many years. "Murder," I replied briefly. "Look at the bruises on her neck and the scratches on her hands. Someone strangled her and then left the body here to make it look like an accident." Dr. Clark nodded and began his preliminary examination. He measured the body temperature and checked for rigor mortis. According to his preliminary findings, death had occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. In the girl's red leather handbag, we found a student ID card. Kylie Powell, 22 years old, third-year student at the University of Montana in Missoula, majoring in education. Also in the bag were apartment keys, a set of 4 keys on a ring with a small teddy bear, a phone with a broken screen, and a wallet with $73 in cash, a credit card, and a driver's license. Robbery was definitely out of the question. I also found a program from the local theater for the previous week in the purse. A performance of Hamlet, ticket number 12, seat 15. Maybe she was with someone, or maybe she went alone. There was also a half-eaten pack of mint candies and a piece of paper with a handwritten schedule for the buses to the university. I stood on the tracks for a long time, trying to piece together what had happened. The place was fairly secluded. The nearest houses were about 3/4 of a mile away, a small farm belonging to the Miller family, and 2 more houses further down the road. There were no surveillance cameras in the area. The only thing that caught my eye was an old crooked guardhouse by the railroad crossing, which looked like it hadn't been used in 10 years. The paint was peeling, the windows were boarded up, and the roof had caved in places. I walked around the perimeter of the crime scene, carefully examining every square foot. About 20 yards from the body, closer to the dirt road, I found footprints in the soft earth. They were male boot prints, size 44, with a distinctive tread pattern. The tracks led from the road to where the body lay, and then back again. This confirmed my theory that the killer had brought the body here in a car. On the asphalt of the country road, I noticed fresh tire tracks. Someone had recently parked here. From the pattern of the tracks, it was a passenger car, probably a sedan or hatchback. Unfortunately, it was impossible to determine the make. After the body was taken to the morgue for an autopsy, I went to see Kylie's parents. I found their address in her driver's license, 237 Main Street, in the eastern part of town. It was a quiet neighborhood with small houses, probably built in the 1950s or 1960s. Kylie's mother, Dorothy Powell, opened the door before I had a chance to knock. She must have seen me pull up and guessed the purpose of my visit. A woman in her 50s, of medium height, with graying curly hair, stood in a housecoat and slippers. Her brown eyes were red from crying and her hands were shaking. "She's dead, isn't she?" she asked in a trembling voice. I nodded slowly and introduced myself, showing my ID. Dorothy invited me in, frantically wiping her tears with the back of her hand. In the small, cozy living room sat her husband, David Powell, a sturdy man of about 52, with a receding hairline and calloused hands. He worked as a mechanic at a local factory that manufactured agricultural equipment. When I entered, he stood up and shook my hand silently. His grip was strong, but his hands were shaking. "Who could have done this?" Dorothy asked, sitting down in an armchair and wrapping her arms around herself. "Kylie was a good girl. She was an excellent student and worked part-time at the university library to help pay for her tuition. She always helped us around the house and never caused any trouble. She had no enemies." David remained silent for most of the conversation, only occasionally nodding at his wife's words. When I asked about his daughter's friends, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. She had a good friend at university, Tasha Green. They met in their first year and had been inseparable ever since. They often studied for exams together and went to the movies. And there was a guy in her group, Michael Jackson, I think. "But there was nothing between them, just friends," Dorothy added, wringing her handkerchief in her hands. "In the last 3 or 4 months, Kylie became kind of different, more withdrawn. She used to always share news from university with us, tell us about her classes and her friends. But lately, she often sat in her room at the computer, texting someone." When I asked her who she was talking to, she just smiled and said, "No one special, Mom. We thought she had a boyfriend. You know how it is with young girls. They want to keep it a secret until they're sure the relationship is serious. But she never brought anyone home or talked about him. It was strange for Kylie. She used to be very open. I asked him to tell me more about these changes in his daughter's behavior." "She became dreamy," David said, rubbing his balding head. "She would often stare out the window with this, I don't know how to describe it, a look of hope, I guess. Sometimes I saw her writing long letters by hand. In this age of email, it seemed strange to me. And she was buying new clothes," added Dorothy. "Nothing expensive, mind you, but it was unusual for her. Kylie had always been a practical girl, never wasting money on frivolities. And then suddenly she bought a pretty dress and new shoes. She said she wanted to look better." I wrote down all the details and asked to see Kylie's room. Her parents led me down a short hallway with faded floral wallpaper to a door at the end. The room was small but cozy. There was a single bed with a quilted bedspread, a desk by the window, and a bookcase filled with textbooks and fiction. On the wall above the bed hung a photograph of Kylie with a group of children, probably from her teaching practice. The children were smiling, and Kylie stood in the center, hugging 2 toddlers. On the desk lay open textbooks and notebooks with notes written in neat handwriting. I noticed a small box on the dresser. Inside were some inexpensive rings, earrings, and a chain with a cross. In the corner of the box was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a poem, copied by hand. The poem was signed with the initials GR and dated 3 months ago. "Have you seen this before?" I asked, showing the piece of paper to the parents. They shook their heads. Dorothy took the piece of paper and read it carefully. "That's not her handwriting," she said. I promised to keep my parents informed about the investigation and asked them to think about any changes in their daughter's behavior, new acquaintances, or unusual phone calls. After that, I went to the university. Montana State University in Missoula was an hour's drive from Billings. On the way, I called the dean's office of the education department and arranged to meet with Kylie's classmates and teachers. Tasha Green was a petite girl of about 21, with short, cropped hair and serious, intelligent brown eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. She was studying child psychology and planned to become a school psychologist. We met in the university cafeteria, where she was sitting at a table by the window, sipping coffee and leafing through a thick textbook on developmental psychology. "Kylie was my best friend since freshman year," Tasha said, putting down her book and taking off her glasses to wipe them with trembling hands. We hit it off right away. We had similar outlooks on life, and we both wanted to work with children. I can't believe she's gone. I asked her about Kylie's last days, her mood, her behavior, her social circle. She really changed a lot in the last 3 or 4 months, Tasha admitted, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, a habit that betrayed her nervousness. Kylie became more, how can I put it, secretive. We used to talk about everything, share our secrets and plans for the future. We would sit in the library for hours, not only preparing for classes, but also chatting about life. Lately, she seemed distracted. She was distracted in lectures, checking her phone every 5 minutes. Professor Hendricks even reprimanded her, and Kylie had always been a model student. When I asked her what was going on, she just smiled and said everything was fine, she was just tired. What about her personal life? Was she seeing anyone? Tasha paused, clearly thinking. I think so, although she never told me directly, but there were signs. She started taking better care of herself, bought new makeup, and started wearing dresses and skirts instead of her usual jeans. And yes, she spent a lot of time writing letters online. Several times I caught her writing letters, real ones, on paper. In this day and age, it seemed archaic. When I asked her why, she laughed and said she liked the romance of handwritten letters. But she never introduced any of us to this person. It was strange for Kylie. She always introduced her boyfriends to us before. Did you notice anyone following her, calling her, bothering her in any way? No, nothing like that. Although, about a month ago, she came to university very upset. She said she had received some important news but didn't give any details. She also started going home less often. She used to visit her parents every weekend, but in the last few months she stayed in the dorm. Next, I spoke with Michael Jackson, Kylie's classmate. He was a tall, thin, 23-year-old with attentive eyes behind glasses. He was studying mathematics and planned to become a high school teacher. He worked part-time as an assistant in the university library. We talked in the reading room, between shelves of books on education. Kylie was a wonderful girl, he said, adjusting his slipping glasses. She was always ready to help with studies, explain a difficult topic. We sometimes studied for exams together, did group projects, but there was never anything romantic between us. We were just friends. When I asked him if he had noticed any changes in Kylie's behavior lately, Michael paused. Yes, now that you mention it, in recent months she seemed, how can I put it, excited, but not in a bad way, more like she was waiting for something important. You know how people act before important events in their lives? That's how Kylie was. But she didn't seem happy. Sometimes I saw a look of anxiety on her face, especially when she got messages on her phone, and she got them quite often. Did you ever see who the messages were from? No, she always hid her phone quickly. But once, about 2 weeks ago, we were sitting in the library and she got a message. She read it and turned pale. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, just family stuff. But she looked scared. I also spoke to several of Kylie's teachers. They all spoke very highly of her. A diligent student who never missed class without a valid reason and always handed in her work on time. Her grades were excellent, a grade point average of 4.8 out of 5. The head of the elementary education department, Professor Angela Harris, a woman in her mid-50s with gray hair pulled back in a strict style, added, Kylie was one of the most talented students we've had in recent years. She dreamed of becoming an elementary school teacher and was simply made for it. Last semester, she did her internship at an elementary school on 3rd Avenue. The children adored her, and the teachers spoke of her with enthusiasm. She had a special gift for working with children. She knew how to reach every child, even the most difficult ones. I was sure that in a year after graduation, she would be a wonderful teacher. But Professor Harris also confirmed that in recent months, Kylie had become less focused on her studies. She was still doing her work, but I felt that her mind was elsewhere. In seminars, she often stared out of the window, and when I asked her questions, it took her a few seconds to focus. I also visited the elementary school where Kylie was doing her internship. The school principal, Mrs. Elizabeth Thomas, told me about that period. Kylie spent 2 months with us this spring. The second graders literally fell in love with her. She was patient, kind, and found an individual approach to each child. She even got along with Timmy Brown, who is the most difficult child in our school. By the end of the day, as I was returning to Billings, I realized that I had no obvious suspects. Kylie was a typical student who lived a quiet life, studied, worked part-time, and socialized with a small circle of friends. She had no enemies, no debts, didn't use drugs, and hardly drank alcohol. The only thing that stood out from her ordinary life was a change in behavior over the last few months, mysterious correspondence, and an obviously romantic relationship with someone she was hiding from her friends and family. When I returned to the station around 8 p.m., I met with Officer Sarah Turner, who had been assigned to assist me with the case. Sarah was a young woman of about 29, a specialist in computer forensics and digital evidence. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her intelligent brown eyes studied the crime scene photos spread out on my desk. "Interesting case," she said, looking at the photos of the bruises on the victim's neck. "It looks like the killer had enough time to move the body to the railroad tracks. That suggests he knew the area and was confident no one would see him." I told her about the interviews I had conducted, the poem found in Kylie's room, and how everything pointed to a secret romantic relationship. "The key to solving this case is most likely in her phone or computer," Sarah agreed. "Tomorrow I'll work on recovering the data from the broken phone. The screen was cracked, but if the motherboard was intact, we could retrieve her messages, contact list, and call history. I would also need to go to the dorm where Kylie lived and search her room there. Perhaps I would find a computer or other personal items that would shed light on her secret correspondent." We agreed to meet tomorrow morning. I gave Sarah the keys to Kylie's apartment, which I found in her purse, and asked her to thoroughly search the place. The next morning I met Sarah Turner at the police station at 8 o'clock. She had already managed to partially recover the data from Kylie's broken phone. The screen was hopelessly broken, but the motherboard was intact. "I have some interesting news," Sarah said, showing me the printouts. "The phone has saved the last 3 months of correspondence. Most of the messages are normal, with her friend Tasha, her parents, her classmates, but there is something unusual." She placed a stack of printouts in front of me. I saw screenshots of messages from a contact listed as my sunshine. The messages came regularly, almost every day. The last one was 3 days before the murder. But the most interesting thing is that the number was registered to Henry Rodriguez. I carefully scrolled through the messages. The messages were full of romance and passion. "My dear Kylie, how I miss you. Every day here feels like an eternity. Your letters are the only thing that keeps me going. I'm counting down the days until I'm free. I want to see your face, hold you in my arms, not just in my dreams. I've changed, Kylie. You changed me. I'll never make mistakes again. We'll be happy together." The last messages, dated 3 weeks ago, sounded more alarming. "Why aren't you answering my calls? I'm worried. Kylie, I need to see you. Please, let's meet." And the last message from the contact, my sunshine, was sent 3 days before the murder. "You can't just disappear from my life. I'll find you." "Let's check Henry Rodriguez's address," I said, "and find out everything we can about his criminal record." Sarah nodded and got to work on the computer. Half an hour later, we had a complete file on Henry Rodriguez. 30 years old, served 5 years for armed robbery, released a month ago. Address, 512 Industrial Street, Apartment 7. But first, we had to thoroughly search Kylie's room in the university dormitory. Her room was on the 3rd floor of an old 4-story dormitory building. The room was small but cozy, a typical student's room. There was a desk by the window, covered with textbooks and notes. On the shelf above the desk were photos of her family, friends, and children from the school where she did her internship. I noticed a small box standing in the corner of the desk. Inside the box, I found a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. The envelopes were addressed to Kylie Powell, but the return address was a correctional facility in Montana. The sender was Henry Rodriguez, inmate number 74,892. There were more than 40 letters. I opened a few of them. The first ones, dated almost 2 years ago, were cautious, almost formal. "Dear Kylie, thank you for your letter. It's nice to know that there are people who don't judge people like me. In prison, there's a lot of time to think about life and mistakes." Over time, the letters became more personal and romantic. "Kylie, You have become the light in my dark life. Your letters are the only thing that gives me hope. I dream of the day when we will meet." The last letters, written shortly before his release, were full of plans for the future. "Soon, we will be together, my love. I will find a job, we will rent an apartment, and start a new life. I promise you that I will never disappoint you again." In addition to the letters, there were photographs in the box. Some of them showed Kylie in prison, probably during visits. She was sitting at a table across from a man in his 30s, black, with short hair and attentive eyes. Henry Rodriguez looked muscular, with a tattoo on his left forearm. "So they met in prison," I said, studying the photos. "But how did they meet?" In the same box, I found another interesting document, a letter from Second Chance, an organization that ran rehabilitation programs for prisoners. Kylie had signed up for the program almost 2 years ago. She was randomly assigned a pen pal, Henry Rodriguez. What was supposed to be a simple correspondence as part of a social project turned into something more. I carefully gathered all the letters and photos as evidence. We urgently needed to talk to the prison administration and find out more about this pen pal program. The Montana State Correctional Facility was located 50 miles from Billings. The drive took just over an hour. The prison was a typical gray concrete complex surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. Guard towers stood at the corners of the perimeter. In the administration building, we were met by the deputy warden, Captain Robert Washington, a man of about 55 with gray hair and a stern gaze. He led us into his office, whose walls were decorated with diplomas and letters of appreciation. "The Pen Pal program has been running for 10 years, Captain Washington explained, leafing through a folder of documents. "It's part of the rehabilitation program. We work with several universities in the state. Students volunteer to correspond with inmates and help them prepare for life on the outside. Prisoners are selected for the program very carefully. They must have good behavior, no disciplinary violations for at least a year, and undergo a psychological evaluation." Henry Rodriguez was one of the most disciplined prisoners. "What can you tell me about him?" I asked. Rodriguez was serving time for armed robbery, 5 years. During his entire time here, he didn't have a single serious infraction. He worked in the prison library, participated in educational programs, and earned a high school diploma. Many of our staff members spoke highly of him. The captain took out another folder. "The correspondence with Miss Powell began a year and 10 months ago. At first, everything was normal, just the usual letters within the program. But after about 6 months, the nature of the correspondence changed. The letters began to come more frequently and became more personal. We started monitoring the correspondence more closely. Rodriguez requested permission to visit Miss Powell as his fiancée. This was against the rules of the program, but technically he had the right to do so." "And you allowed the visits?" "Yes, but under strict supervision. In the 6 months before his release, he met with her 6 times. Each visit was supervised by security, as required. No violations were reported." The captain showed us the visitor log. Kylie's last visit with Henry was a week before his release. The log indicated that the visit went well and lasted 2 hours. "Where is Rodriguez now? Is he reporting as required?" "Yes, he regularly reports to his probation officer. There have been no violations of the terms of his early release. He works as a loader at an industrial goods warehouse on Industrial Street." We thanked the captain for the information and headed to Henry Rodriguez's address. The building on Industrial Street was an old 3-story apartment building from the early 1980s. The paint on the walls was peeling, and some of the windows were boarded up with plywood. Apartment number 7 was on the 2nd floor. I knocked on the door. A few seconds later, a man I recognized from the photos in Kylie's room opened the door. Henry Rodriguez looked exactly like the pictures. He was about 6 feet tall, with a strong build, short black hair, and alert dark eyes. On his left forearm was a tattoo of a cross with a date. He was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt with work boots on his feet. When he saw us, his face tensed, but he tried to remain calm. "Henry Rodriguez?" I asked, showing him my badge. "Detective Jones, this is Officer Turner. We need to talk to you about Kylie Powell." His face contorted painfully. He silently led us into the apartment. The apartment was small and modestly furnished. A sofa, a TV, a small table, and minimal furniture. A photo of Kylie hung on the wall, the same one I had seen in prison. Her letters were lying on the table. "Sit down," Henry said, pointing to the sofa. He remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "What happened to Kylie? She hasn't answered my calls for a week." "Mr. Rodriguez, I have to tell you that Kylie is dead. Her body was found the day before yesterday on the railroad tracks. She was murdered." Henry staggered and sank into a chair. His face turned pale and his hands began to shake. "Murdered? That can't be. Why would anyone want to hurt her?" I watched his reaction closely. Either he was an excellent actor or he was genuinely shocked by the news. "Mr. Rodriguez, when was the last time you saw or spoke to Kylie?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I called her 3 days ago, but she didn't answer. I sent her messages, but no response. The last time I saw her was a month ago in prison before I was released." "And you haven't seen her since you were released?" Henry shook his head. "No, I wanted to see her. I called her, but she said she needed time, that everything was moving too fast. I waited, hoping she would get in touch herself." "That contradicts your messages," said Sarah, showing him the printouts of their correspondence. "It says here, 'You can't just disappear from my life. I'll find you.'" Henry lowered his head. "Yes, I wrote that. I was angry, upset. 2 years of correspondence, 6 months of dates, and then suddenly complete silence. But that doesn't mean I was going to hurt her." I continued the interrogation. "Mr. Rodriguez, where were you on the night of October 26th to 27th, between midnight and 3 a.m.? "At home, asleep. I work from 8 a.m., so I go to bed early." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I live alone, but—" He pointed to the window. "Mrs. Garcia from across the street saw me come home from work around 6 in the evening, and at 7 in the morning she saw me again when I left for work." I wrote down the neighbor's name for further verification. "Tell me how your relationship with Kylie developed." Henry took a deep breath. "At first, it was just correspondence as part of the prison program. Kylie was studying education and wanted to help people. She wrote to me about her life, her studies, her dreams. I told her how sorry I was for what I had done and how I wanted to change my life. Gradually, we became friends, and then we fell in love. Kylie said she saw a good person in me who had simply made a mistake. She believed I could change." "What changed after your release?" "I thought we would move in together right away. But Kylie said it wasn't that simple, that she needed time to get used to me being free. Her parents were against our relationship, and so were her friends. She felt pressured." Henry stood up and walked over to the photo on the wall. "I truly loved her. She was the only bright spot in my life. Without her, I have nothing left." After the interview, we drove to the warehouse where Henry worked to check his alibi. The industrial warehouse was located in an industrial area of the city. We spoke with his boss, Jack Miller, a man in his mid-40s with rough hands. "Rodriguez is a good worker," Miller said. "He shows up on time, doesn't skip work, knows his job. As for October 26th, he flipped through the timesheet. Yes, he worked a full day from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, and on the 27th he was back at work at 8 in the morning." We also spoke to several of Henry's colleagues. They all confirmed that he was a conscientious worker, kept to himself, and didn't cause any trouble. 3 of them saw him on the morning of the 27th when he arrived at work as usual. Henry's alibi seemed solid. His neighbor confirmed that she had seen him on the evening of the 26th and on the morning of the 27th. His co-workers confirmed that he was at work at his usual time. By the end of the day, we were back at the station. Sarah processed additional information from Kylie's phone but found nothing new. All calls and messages from the past few weeks were from family, friends, and Henry. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, leaning back in her chair. "He has an alibi, but it's not ironclad. He was only seen by an elderly neighbor in the evening who could have been mistaken about the time. And between 6 p.m. on the 26th and 8 a.m. on the 27th, he had enough time to meet with Kylie. But the motive, if he really loved her, why kill her? Unless he couldn't get over the breakup. And then there's the threat in the message. 'I'll find you.' Maybe he lied to us," Sarah suggested. "Maybe they met after he was released, and Kylie decided to break up with him. He couldn't accept it." I nodded. It was entirely possible, but so far we only had suspicions, not evidence. Tomorrow we'll check his story more thoroughly. We'll talk to the neighbor again, find surveillance cameras in the area around his house and the warehouse, and we'll try to determine if he really didn't see Kylie after his release. The investigation had reached a dead end. We had a prime suspect, a motive, and an opportunity, but we lacked decisive evidence. Henry Rodriguez remained free but under close surveillance. I knew we needed a breakthrough. There had to be a clue we had missed. The killer couldn't have disappeared without a trace, leaving no clues behind. As I went to bed, I was still thinking about the case. The correspondence between Kylie and Henry revealed a love story that began behind prison walls and may have ended in tragedy on the railroad tracks. But for now, these were just assumptions. A week had passed since Kylie Powell's body was found. During that time, we had questioned Henry Rodriguez several times, checked his alibi, and followed him, but we couldn't gather enough evidence to arrest him. The investigation was stalled, so I decided to return to the crime scene one more time. Sometimes a fresh perspective or changed circumstances can reveal something new. On the morning of November 3rd, Sarah and I drove to the railroad tracks. The weather was cold, with a light drizzle turning the ground into slippery mud. The crime scene was still cordoned off with yellow tape, even though the official investigation had ended a week earlier. I walked along the same paths and examined the same areas where Kylie's body had lain a week ago. In the daylight, some details looked different. The signs of a struggle we had noticed before had been washed away by the rain, but I noticed something I had missed the first time. 20 meters from the railroad tracks, near a small ravine, I found a crumpled cigarette pack. It was a pack of Marlboro Reds, not new, and it had been lying there for several days. It might not be related to the murder, but I put it in an evidence bag anyway. "Detective Jones," Sarah called to me. She was standing by a dilapidated guardhouse. "Someone lives here." I walked over to her. Thin smoke was coming out of the chimney, and one of the boarded-up windows was ajar. We approached the door and knocked. "Who's there?" came a hoarse voice from inside. "Police, please open the door." A few minutes later, the door opened slightly, and an elderly black man of about 67 peered out. Unshaven, in worn clothes, he smelled of alcohol and tobacco. It was Walter Brown, as we later learned. "What do you want?" he asked, squinting suspiciously at us. I showed him my badge. "Detective Jones, a murder took place here a week ago. We're investigating the case. Could you answer a few questions?" Walter was silent for a moment, then reluctantly opened the door wider. "Come in, since you're here." The interior of the house was cramped and smelled of mold. One room served as a kitchen, bedroom, and living room. There was a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey on the table. A small stove was burning in the corner, giving off the smoke we had seen outside. "Mr. Brown, how long have you lived here?" I asked, looking around. "About 3 years. After the railroad stopped using this section for freight trains, the house stood empty. So I settled in. No one's chasing me away." Walter was a former railroad worker who had lost his job when freight traffic through the station ceased. He lived on a small allowance and odd jobs. He spent most of his money on alcohol. "Were you at home on the night of October 26th to 27th? Walter nodded, pouring himself some whiskey into a dirty glass. "Always at home at night. Where would I go?" "Did you see anything unusual that night? A car, people?" The old man took a drink from his glass and thought for a moment. "There was a car. It was parked where the road meets the railroad tracks. It was after midnight, around 2 o'clock, I think." My heart began to beat faster. This was the first witness who had seen anything that night. "Tell me more. What kind of car was it?" "Dark, some kind of sedan. The headlights went out. Then a door slammed. I looked out the window. Curiosity, you know. I saw a man. Describe him." Walter scratched his unshaven cheek. Black, tall, strong build. He was leading someone, a girl, I think. She was walking reluctantly. He was pulling her by the arm. "Then what?" "Then I fell asleep. You know, I'd been drinking that night." He looked guiltily at the bottle. "I woke up in the morning to the sound of a train. The driver was braking, whistling. I went out to look and saw the body." The description of the man matched Henry Rodriguez's appearance. Tall, well-built, black, but Walter was drunk, and his testimony could have been inaccurate. Mr. Brown, if we show you some photos, would you be able to identify the man you saw? I can try. Although, as I said, it was dark and I showed him several photos, including Henry's. Walter looked at them for a long time, then pointed to Henry's photo. This one looks like him. Yes, it was him. But such identification did not have much legal weight, given the condition of the witness and the circumstances of the observation. We thanked Walter and returned to the station. The old alcoholic's testimony confirmed our theory that Henry was involved in the murder, but we needed more solid evidence. Good news awaited us at the station. Sarah had spent the night working on Kylie's computer, which we had seized from her apartment. "Detective, I have something interesting," she said, pointing to the monitor screen. "I hacked into Kylie's cloud storage. There's a hidden folder with photos she never showed anyone." Photos dated 3 weeks ago appeared on the screen after Henry's release. In the pictures, Kylie and Henry were together in a cafe, then in a park, then in an apartment that was clearly not Kylie's student room. "So he lied," I said. "They met after he was released." Sarah clicked further. Several more photos showed them together in different places. Kylie looked happy, but in the last photos, her face seemed tense and worried. We found the most interesting thing at the end of the folder, a video recording made on Kylie's phone. She clearly didn't know she was being recorded. Henry's voice can be heard on the recording. "You can't leave me, Kylie. We have to be together. I've waited 5 years for this moment." Kylie's voice sounded frightened. "Henry, please. I need time. This is all happening too fast." "No time. I've wasted 5 years of my life dreaming about us. You promised you'd wait for me." The recording cuts off. This was the decisive piece of evidence. Now we knew for sure that Henry had been lying about his meetings with Kylie, and we had proof of his threatening behavior. I contacted the district attorney and obtained an arrest warrant for Henry Rodriguez. We also got a search warrant for his apartment. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our team left for the warehouse where Henry worked. In addition to Sarah and me, 4 SWAT officers and 2 patrol officers participated in the operation. We didn't expect serious resistance, but considering that Henry had been convicted of armed robbery, precautions were not unnecessary. The warehouse was a large, single-story building made of metal panels. Inside were tall racks of goods, forklifts, and packaging equipment. Warehouse workers bustled between the rows, picking orders. We found Henry in the far corner of the warehouse, loading boxes onto a pallet. When he saw us, he immediately understood why we were there. His face turned pale, and panic flashed in his eyes. "Henry Rodriguez, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Kylie Powell," I said, approaching him with handcuffs. Suddenly, Henry grabbed a heavy tool from the shelf and swung it at me. I managed to dodge it, but he was already running toward the exit. "Stop!" I shouted, but Henry didn't stop. He rushed out of the warehouse through a side entrance and ran to a car parked nearby. It wasn't his car, but one of the workers' trucks. Henry smashed the window, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. The special forces opened fire on the truck's wheels, but Henry managed to get away. A chase began. The truck sped through the industrial area, weaving between buildings. Henry was unfamiliar with the vehicle and nearly collided with several parked cars. Our patrol cars pursued him while I coordinated the operation via radio. Soon, Henry was cornered. The road ended at the fence of a large factory. The truck slammed on the brakes. Henry jumped out of the cab and ran toward the fence, but he tripped and fell. When we reached him, he was lying on the asphalt with his hands pressed against his face. "It's over, Henry," I said, putting handcuffs on him. He didn't resist, just breathed heavily. His elbow was scraped from the fall, but otherwise he was unharmed. At the station, in the interrogation room, Henry sat silently, staring at the floor. I placed the photos from Kylie's cloud storage in front of him. "Stop lying, Henry. We have proof that you met with Kylie after your release, and we have a recording of you threatening her." Henry looked up. I saw no anger in his eyes, only deep sadness. "I didn't want to hurt her," he said quietly. "I swear I didn't." "Then tell me what happened that night." Henry was silent for a long time, then took a deep breath. "Yes, we did meet after I was released. The first 2 weeks were wonderful. We were happy. She rented an apartment for me and we made plans. But then something changed. Her parents found out about our relationship and made a scene. Her friends turned their backs on her. Rumors started at the university. And what happened on October 26th? Kylie called me and asked to meet. She said we needed to talk. I knew right away that it wasn't going to be good. We met at her house. She said it was over, that she couldn't live like this anymore, that she needed a break. Henry fell silent, wiping his eyes. I was furious. I had waited 5 years for her, dreamed of our life together, and she wanted to throw it all away because of other people's opinions. We argued and shouted at each other. Then she said she was going to move to her aunt's in another state, that she didn't want to see me anymore. And I grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the car. I wanted to take her somewhere where we could talk calmly. But she resisted. Yes, she screamed and tried to break free. I drove her to the railroad tracks. I thought that in such a secluded place she would listen to me. But there she told me, Henry's voice broke. She said she never loved me, that she felt sorry for me in prison, but it wasn't love, that I disgusted her. I don't remember what happened next. All I remember is grabbing her by the throat. She stopped breathing, and then I realized what I had done. And you left the body on the tracks. Yes. I thought they'd decide she'd committed suicide, or that it was an accident. Henry buried his head in his hands. I loved her. I really did. But I couldn't survive her betrayal. She was the only bright spot in my life, and when she wanted to leave me, I lost my mind. After the confession, the formalities took a little time. Henry signed a full confession and was transferred to a prison hospital under the supervision of a psychiatrist until his trial. That evening, I drove to Kylie's parents' house to tell them about the breakthrough in the case. Dorothy and David greeted the news with relief mixed with bitterness. "Thank you, Detective," Dorothy said. "At least now we know the truth." David shook my hand silently. There were tears in his eyes. The next day, I closed the case of the murder of Kylie Powell. Henry Rodriguez was charged with second-degree murder and was awaiting trial. The prosecutor warned that, given the confession and the circumstances of the case, Henry would most likely receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The love story that began behind prison walls ended in tragedy on a deserted railroad track. Kylie Powell paid with her life for trying to help a man who was incapable of living without her.